Welcome to TCAF 2021. I am honored to be hosting a discussion on rage, apathy, and satire in the Black creative realm. Before we begin, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Palm Belt Covenant, the agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for the land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. And this acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land, and is an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Tekaronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. Thank you everyone for coming. Just a note, if you want to turn on closed captioning, you can turn it on at the bottom right corner of your screen where it says live transcript. Welcome everyone to Rage, Apathy, and Satire in the Black creative realm. We'll discuss rage, apathy, and satire in art as Black creators with special guest artists Abdul Ali, Ben Passmore, and Richie Pope. Referencing work and life, and we address the complexities of creative license within the context of Blackness, punk, and artistry in general. Thank you all for joining me, Ben Passmore, Abdul Ali, and Richie Pope. I'm super excited to have this discussion and all sorts of takeaways we may get from this. So I am honored. Thank you so much. Just a little bit about our awesome guests. Abdul Ali is an electronic music artist, writer, and cultural worker based in Baltimore. Their music is an idiosyncratic blend of punk, jazz, Baltimore club music, and rap, performing across the United States and Europe through their energetic, visceral live shows, spiritualizing audiences. They have been anointed as a cosmic, punk, and soulful tempest on stage. Ali's art practice spans across sound, dialogue, literary text, and performance. Ali has performed at MoMA PS1, the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Kennedy Center, and their work has been highlighted by the New York Times, The Fader, Elephant Magazine, and Trax Art TV. And Ali has been a recipient of the 2018 Ruby Artist Grant and have held audience residencies at 2018 Red Bull Music Academy, Basecamp, and 2018 Pioneer Works. And in 2019, Ali founded As They Lay, a curatorial platform that claims space for critical dialogue, collaboration, and radical envisioning for Black creative futures. My friend opened for you in DC back in the day, so I'm super excited to have you. And your album literally is fire, even though it's named Fire.
You.
So thank you for joining us. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. And we have Ben Passmore. Ben Passmore's work ranges from the wild to the wildly autobiographical, containing cold takes on politics, anarchism, police brutality, history, sports, and Black identity. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Believer magazine, and MoMA magazine. He is also a frequent contributor to the comics publication The Nib. His book, Your Black Friend, was nominated for the Eisner Award in 2017 and won the Ignatz Award for Outstanding Comic that same year. Congrats. His latest graphic novel, following the lives of 7 Black insurrectos, These Black Arms to Hold You Up, drops in 2022. Back in the day, I loved Dago A-Hole and Your Black Friend. So this is it's awesome to be able to like meet you at TCAF in person, and now to just also subscribe to your work consistently just feels it almost feels coming full circle to be having this discussion with you. So thank you for joining us, Ben.
Absolutely.
Richie Pope, last but not least, is an awarded illustrator, cartoonist, and storyboard artist from New Post News Virginia. Currently working on the children's animated series Craig of the Creek. Yo, they were about to cancel that, and I was so mad. So I'm glad to know that you're part of it.
So,
Um, it's still going, it's still going. And residing in Los Angeles currently. Thank you so much for joining us, Richie Pope. I still have your lapel pin. Look alive, and honestly, I literally take it with me on my hard days of work. So, uh, yeah. So thank you for that. So the discussion: rage, apathy, and satire. So those three expressions, rage, apathy, and satire, I wanted to bring to y'all as artists because you all are prolific and you create confrontational, experimental art that challenges both the left and right wings. So your works respectively coincide with each other, even though you are all not the same, and they beautifully express the complexities of like creative license within the context of blackness, what it means to either flirt with or be punk, and how that coincides with your artistry. And more importantly, it also addresses the apprehensiveness of creatives, to say the right thing. And that's something I would like to discuss with y'all, among many other things within this 1 hour window. um, so apathy, as a word, every time I look at it in the dictionary, there's always this sort of sense of uh, you know there's a sense of I guess laziness, like inferenced in it. And so I feel like, for me personally, as a Black person, I think it takes a lot to express apathy. It takes a lot to express apathy within our art. And it takes a lot to just sort of approach it and embody it. So, what is your relationship to apathy, and how do you incorporate it in your work, or how do you approach it within your work in general? So, I'll start with Ben, and then Abdu, and then Richie. Does that sound good? Awesome.
um, well, the first thing it makes me think about is um, like during the Civil War, or sort of like the sunset of it. There's I'm trying to remember. I think there may be the Shelter Islands that are off the coast of South Carolina. Um, but anyway, there's a series of islands off the coast that were had like plantations and stuff on them. And as the Union Army was coming down, all the white people were like, "We got to get out of here. Union Army's going to kill us." And they were like to enslaved people there, they're like, "You got to come too. Like they're going to kill you." And the people were like, "Nah, I think we're just going to stay here." So there are these islands that basically like all the white people left, and the Union Army showed up. And when they showed up, people were just living their lives. You know what I mean? There was no overseers. There's nothing like that. And there's some written descriptions about, from first the Union Army, and then like later some like Northeast, like what we would probably consider liberals at the time, who came down and were like, we gotta get them back to work. You know what I mean? And their description of the people there was mostly criticizing them for their lack of interest in working. Which I think is really interesting to me, and also really speaks to sort of this misunderstanding or this misperception, that I think about a lot, that our communities sort of like the way we coalesce socially, or sort of inhabit this sort of like space that I think is like colonized space, is like read as like maybe apathy, or disorder, things that feel sort of like adjacent to like a lack of planning or like a lack of enthusiasm. So I guess I think about that a lot, and how to like, and for me, I think like, in some ways, maybe like a personal, but also sort of like in creating sort of like narratives, or like the culture of a narrative. I often like think that there's something funny in sort of like the tension between sort of like an indifference, or sort of like the willful sort of like presentation of a lack of caring in the face of like maybe white expectation or just sort of mainstream expectation. I find that tension to be very funny because I also think it's just like probably even before like our first ancestors were here, just in transit, that just being like baseline being incredibly frustrating to white people was like a very common kind of resistance. So like the presentation of like apathy that's like covering like what I think like a much deeper sort of like understanding that apathy is, or the presentation of apathy as a strategy, I think is something that I sort of obsess about a lot. I think like really drives like my personal humor.
So for me, when I first saw this panel and saw like, you know, apathy, satire, and rage in the title, I was like, yeah, rage, yeah, I'm with that. Satire, of course, I'm with that too. But apathy was the one. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this because I care to disrupt. I care to create chaos. I care to like really, you know, be in resistance. Like apathy, and can I afford to be to like perform apathy as a Black queer gender non-conforming person? But then I thought about apathy in the sense of like not centering the white gaze. And I think Ben was kind of speaking to this too, and just like the idea of not performing for the white gaze. And it's something that, you know, not until recently I was really conscious of and critical of. I think everyone loves that interview clip with Toni Morrison, and she's talking to the white dude, and she was like, I don't care to speak, you know, for what, you know, to speak about Black people so white people can understand it, right? Like, I don't care to do that. I don't care to be concerned with the white gaze, you know? And once I saw that interview, and also I'm a fan of Toni and reading her work, but once I saw that interview, I was just like, yes, I get it. And like, I think, you know, before I saw that, maybe I performed empathy in some ways and working to not center the white gaze. But now I'm just super, super aware and critical in regards to ensuring that I'm not performing for whiteness and I'm not performing for the white gaze. And I think moving, you know, not just my practice forward, but like the collective Black consciousness, I think it's just important for us to continue to do work that decolonizes the gaze, you know, and creates a kind of, I guess, a lens that's truly autonomous. And I know that it sounds like easy on the surface level, but when I think about decolonizing the gaze, I think about like, you know, being an anti-capitalist and, you know what I'm saying, not in being, you know, in disrupting patriarchy and heteronormativity and like all these sub oppressive ideologies that fall under what it means to really truly decolonize the white gaze. So it's a lot of work, and it's something that when it comes to apathy in that sense, it's something that I'm diligently being aware of and try to confront, you know, and try to, you know, encompass in my work and everyday life, honestly, in my romantic relationships and my friendships and every type of way, you know. But yeah, I think also I thought about just like how the pandemic, I think, has really influenced a lot of Black people to be like, I don't care about working. And I think, like I said, Ben was kind of speaking to this in regards to, you know, just like, you know, like, yeah, I don't care about working, being lazy is an act of resistance as Black people. And just, you know, let's say like, you know, forget like, you know, just trying to, you know, perform, you know, even the idea of like artists and how we, I think, have been imprisoned by this idea of, you know, being productive and productivity and always performing on social media, online, and just like and just like trying to, you know, just always contribute to that basically capitalism and just working all the time. I think that the pandemic has definitely influenced me to not give a fuck about doing too much and not and not working and not like and just doing what I want to do at all times, you know, and centering my joy, my well-being and sustainability, you know. So yeah, apathy. That's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, I knew this panel was gonna be good. Yeah, I kind of just to sort of like go off what they both said, like very similar feelings, because like for me, like a good portion of my art life was illustration, and so much of it was like approval, not like art approval, but just like approving aesthetics, approving like color, like approving like mood. And so like there's so much of like, you know, adding a voice, and during like all the like diversity talks of like, you know, put your voice into your work, put your voice into your work. But then at the end, it's still always approved by like the same people say, yeah, this is authentic. You know, it's like a person saying like, yo, go to this so-and-so restaurant, this is the real food. And it's like, you're saying that because it presents in a way that you feel is like, you know, you're visiting and you're like, you're getting something special, you know. And so for me, it was like, it was kind of like, I didn't know how to not care. Like it was so much pressure to like always impress. And especially if you're a Black artist in like whatever like community you're in, there, if you start getting some attention, there tends to be like a almost like a corporation mentality put on you, where like there has to be constant growth. So like you're here and then you have to be this type of leader, and then this, you know, like people kind of put pressure on you. It's like, you know, you're really important, man, you're really important. I'm like, I don't think I'm any more important than like the other Black artists a couple tables down. They just didn't get the same things that I got. Just that's just how it is, you know. And so I just feel this weird pressure of like the tension of being really, really close and wanting to like get to know all these like Black artists in my community. And then when I'm around like sort of like white authority or just like authority in those communities, I feel like a pull, like a let's like put you over here, let's put you in this kind of place. And I don't know, like it kind of drained me. And so I started to have apathy towards towards like making people making clients happy and always like being like available for them. And again, like with the white gaze and like just this feeling of like do they like my work, or do they like that I'm making something that's not offensive? You know, I started to get really self-conscious about the stuff I was making, and so that I didn't want to like do a lot of illustration anymore. And so comics became like, there's no editor for the most part, there's no like, you know, there's no one saying like don't put that in panel 2. I can kind of just do whatever and then just put it out. And so it was like completely separate from my work. And I think now that I work in animation, it's like, it's weird because you think it'd be more rigid, and we can kind of just throw whatever crazy ideas we have. And it's more like, that's not gonna get past the network, you know? So it's weird. Like I almost have some more like creative freedom in like a production environment than I did like freelancing from home. So yeah, it's been mostly me learning how to not care about that expectation, just pushing it away. Like, no, I don't, you know, I'm good. I don't want it.
100%. I think y'all have different relationships with apathy, but I think they also bring up this sort of they don't come from nowhere, right? So I think it comes with a lot of labor to get to that point of like, this is how I'm going to express this, even though it will be read as nonchalance, non-compliance, or laziness. And I think that's the one thing that I think gets me on edge a lot. And I think, Richie, you bring up a really good point in getting, once you as an artist you get a certain amount of attention, I think there's definitely this growing anxiety of like, okay, like what do people want from me? And so, and I'm just like, okay, then there's that whole idea of like, how much of yourself can you actually be in your work, and like what are you willing to lose in order to continue creating work that also sustains your life. And so I think this also comes to like talking about the affordability in controversy in our work, which I think it's some of the most exciting work that we create, is being able to express that there is controversy in being able to you know, push through the bullshit and to also create new ideas. And it's through controversy that I think we all sort of either, I hate the word progress, but I'm just going to use it. But I guess, what is your relationship to that? I guess what you brought from apathy and the affordability of controversy in your artistic expression. Are they completely related, or do they have a fork in the road where you're just kind of like, I'm gonna do my own thing here, and I will continue to do my own thing another way based on like what you need, especially when, you know, you're an artist who's also trying to like sustain a living too.
Yeah, I know with stuff last year of all the protests and whatnot. And, I think it just took everybody out. It's only so much you can take, and you're just like, not disillusioned, but you're just like, it's just an anger, and there's no like socially non get myself in trouble way to like really, like really like communicate, especially when you have like your job doesn't stop, your daily life doesn't stop. It's hard to like take a break from it to like express. And so like when I made like almost like protest art last year, it was kind of inspired by stuff I learned from comics, which was sort of like, oh, if you have like a very like an illustration too, if you have a very like visually like almost like appealing sort of style, like something that's very like accessible and like very like clean or like easily readable, and people will like look at it like, oh, okay, what's this? And then like you can kind of get them after with the stuff you said. So like when I did a comic I sit on, it was with these two kids, and I was like, I'll make the kids cute and have like really soft line work, and then I'll have a couple panels of like them having a robot like defeating police, just as a casual like, yeah man, this is what we want to do. Like, so then I did it again last year where I was like, I wanted to depict this stuff that was like really like fucked up and really like intense, but using like the way that I draw, so that even if people did like disagreed, I wanted them almost like a flex. I wanted them to be like, well, damn, this is a good drawing though. Like it's almost something visceral that they can't deny. They're like, oh, I gotta look at it. It's like if it's music, oh, it sounds good. Like, I don't hear the lyrics, but damn, it sounds so good. So I feel like that was how I was able to sort of. I thought I was gonna get in trouble personally because one definitely had like a cop in not a non-desirable physical position. I'll say that, and I was like, man, no one's saying anything. I think just because it didn't look like what people expect that type of art to look like.
I think in terms of like the idea of like controversy, or like how controversy comes into play in terms of my expression, I think like for me, like when I came into comics, like when I started going into the shows, I already had the benefit of being within like this like an anarcho-punk subculture. And so I had the benefit of sort of like thinking about okay, what is the difference between subversion and me just being like an edgelord? Like, what is, I like I'm a cis dude. Like, I grew up working class. I went to art school. That combination, you know what I mean? I could produce some like really shitty jokes that are just like, ooh, I'm not supposed to say that. Some like childish, like, you're not supposed to say but, like, you know what I mean? And like mirror, like reflect like really like fucked up, you know what I mean? Like even and like, and I feel like I've seen this before, like when I was starting out, I didn't really see a whole lot of the Black people in the comics, world. So like, there's a bunch of white dudes who I think like who are attracted to my art because it seemed familiar or like similar to an aesthetic and sort of ethos is like underground comics, you know what I mean? Like some art, you know what I mean? I won't, whatever, don't have to name names, we know. So like for me, I was like, even if it's a conversation with myself, like what are the subversions? Like what would I do? What can I do that subverts people's expectations of me and expectations of myself? Like what is actually scary for me to write, as opposed to me just sort of doing, you know what I mean? Just doing edgy shit, And sort of similar to Richie, like Dayglow A-Hole was like first created because I was like, I really want to draw Conan the Barbarian comics. Also, I'm really into like riding trains and living in squats and shit. So it'll be about punks. That's an easy fix. And then I'm like, but I really like low key just want to write about my own sickness. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but there's a dog running around. But but so for me, it was really about like, what can I write that's like scary? And in some ways it's like controversial because it's like not, in some ways it's maybe because of what's expected to me, because of like sort of like the underground ethos, like it's not really like expected for me to write about like certain addictions, like certain kinds of miseries that are not cool to talk about. And for me, I think that was good. I think what's interesting is like, I don't think that I got much of, I think if I kept doing that, I don't think I would have much of a following, because I think in some way, I think because, and I think this is, you know, I think we can all speak to this. It's like, and you know, Richie did, it's like, I think at a certain point, people are like, they like frame you in a certain way, like, oh, you're this kind of important Black artist talking about this specific thing. But if you go outside of that, you know what I mean? Like, at least in my experience, like people are not, you know, it's like, no, this is not what I'm expecting from you as a producer of a commodity that I see as important. You know what I mean? So I think in some ways that's like, that's difficult too. Like as a person, you know, who's also an anti-capitalist, right? But it's like, I'm still doing it for work. I think that I continue to do this shit that people don't really care about in a lot of ways, and prioritize that as much as possible, in part because it's like, okay, I'm not getting like, you know, I'm like not getting that like financial sort of like, or just like people like in my inbox, you know, like white people being like, this is amazing. Like, I'm glad you spoke to this. I feel like I learned a lot. You know what I mean? So for me, that's like, and I think the difficult thing is, Richie said this too. It's like, I think on a lot of levels, like, I don't know if I'm producing good work in of itself, or am I producing work that's just, that they can just understand, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's like always like, that's the hard thing. And it's interesting because it's like, when I was starting out, there was a couple other, like Ron Wimberly was out here. There's a couple other Black cartoonists. And I would like, you would see their work and you'd be like, they're better than a lot of these other people, but it's like, they have to be, right? Because when we're in these spaces that like white people feel like it's still their space, right? Whether or not it's conscious or subconscious, I think it's both. Like you have to be, and this is true for us in general, we have to be so much better, you know what I mean, than everybody else, just to be like, okay, you're here off merit and not just because we needed the token to say this particular kind of thing. So for me, it's like the controversy ends up, I think, in some ways being sort of invisible or only visible to like a small amount of people, because I feel like I'm just subverting sort of like the white gaze more, or like the expectations of me, more than just like me saying some shit, like some edgy shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this question hard, because for me, I think involuntarily I am just automatically controversial being Black, queer, and gender non-conforming. I mean, yeah, even before I was an artist, before I was doing music, obviously my identity and you know, everything that comes with it was already confrontational. And as I was entering the realm of music, I could have easily, you know, been on my Frank Ocean or Lil Nas X and, you know, not told everyone that I was gay, or, you know, trying to play trade a little bit and then have this coming out thing. But I didn't feel the need to do that because I already have representation of people like Miss Tony, who was a Baltimore club legend, and other people, even like RuPaul, or, you know, people that was on TV, RuPaul's Drag Race, and like all these, you know, Black, you know, LGBTQ representation that I saw on TV. I didn't feel like it was necessary. And honestly, for me, it just wouldn't feel right if I went into it not trying to be myself and trying to fit myself in a box and contain, you know, parts of me. So for me, it's funny too, because I feel like I'm always like, damn, Ebony, why you always got to be so buck and so punk and so this and that. But then I think about Baltimore and where I come from and how the city, you know, is portrayed to be, you know, unruly and, you know, just buck. And, you know, in the media, Baltimore gets a lot of negative attention, you know. And so for me, I think I just took that and, you know, kind of flipped it on the table and was like, all right, let me just be as unruly and unapologetically like buck and punk as I can, to try to like prove a point, I guess, and to just be like, you know, you can do this, and you can do this thing in music and still get support. Now, it's definitely probably made things a lot harder for me. And especially with my music, because like I said, like I always wanted to come in left field and create, because I was inspired by people like Alice Coltrane. I was inspired by George Clinton. I was inspired by Sun Ra. I was inspired by Black Star, people who I think that really invented new ways of thinking about music and sounds and just like the sonic experience. So I was like, kind of counter what I'm seeing in not just mainstream culture, but underground culture, counterculture as well. A lot of it was very, just carbon copy, kind of, just like molded into this thing that's pretty accessible, and I came up in the era of Pitchfork and like all these underground blogs that were blowing up and that was supposed to be pioneering like underground culture, but to me I just felt like they still wasn't really being revolutionary. So for me, I was always inspired to create a nuance and sound music and just to be honest and satirical and political in my work, because every day my life is political, and I see the challenges and experiences the challenges of what it means to be Black queer in America, working class. I grew up in the hood, single parent home, and I was just like, no, like I need to put that into my music. And like I said, like it definitely probably made things harder, and not until recently, after 8 years of doing this, I think that institutions, especially within the art world, are starting to finally be like, oh, okay, we get it, we want to support this thing that you're doing. And I think for a long time, like I said, I've been like kind of ignored in a way or invisible, but still very much present. And now I think maybe because counterculture is like hip and cool now, I think the institutions are starting to pay more attention. So when I think about affordability at this point, I just feel like I can't afford to be inauthentic, and it definitely made, things harder. But at the end of the day, I can sleep with like my integrity intact and feeling like everything that I put out there was truly me, So, and I'm here to make noise, and I want more of us to continue to make noise, and noise that's not, because especially with activism, it's very now it's very much so now like marketable and to be kind of radical and to be an activist. Everyone's an activist now, no shade. And it's just like, now we got to disrupt that. Now we got to get more buck, because to move things forward and to really create nuances, like we got to really just challenge, what I'm saying, like the status quo and like, the trendy things and everything that's going on. And honestly, when I think about punk, I'm like, does it exist anymore? Honestly, like no shade, like because when coming up in my era, like I performed and toured, and it was a time where like you perform in basements and in the middle of the woods, and I don't know, just like just very buck punk places. Like I don't even feel like that exists anymore in a way that it should. So yeah, I don't know. That's my that's my response.
I wanted something anyway, everyone here is a genius. Something Abdi just said that I thought was like really good and reminded me of something. It's just something for me. It's like this idea, like this like brand of an activist or something. It is really like, it has become really lucrative in this way that I think is like really worrisome. You know what I mean? And it's
weird.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you can be Black and you can, you know what I mean? Like you can't sell yourself in this way. And I'm like sort of heartened because I've seen a couple different ways of that, just being old, you know what I mean? But it's like, and I've seen a little like people be more and more critical, but it's definitely this very worrisome thing. It's like, you can be an artist, you can be a certain kind of Black artist right now and get the bag, but it's like, I don't think that's a good thing. It's good, we can eat, you know what I mean? But like, it's not, in terms of like culture and pushing things forward, I think it's a step back.
100%, 100%. I think you also Abdul also brought up a really good question of like, does punk exist anymore? And I was just with a couple of friends. I was watching this documentary on Polystyrene, who's a Somali British punk artist, and her daughter was kind of like doing this documentary, kind of like reconnecting with her past, and so in these diary entries of polystyrene, there's this sort of account of like just being, I guess, in the UK and being in the punk scene as a Black woman, and just seeing like this idea of what it means to be punk and how depressing it is for like being Black and just coming into your punk identity and figuring that out. And it's, you're constantly in this toxic relationship with your friends because you want to affirm this punk identity, but you also identify it with this like unanimous group who kind of embody it in a way that you're kind of like, I feel like I identify with this and this, not so sure about being objectified or being felt like less than nothing in the ways that my own friends treat me. And so there's always these sort of like autobiographical accounts of Black people saying like, I was treated like shit in this punk scene, or I was treated like shit in this activist scene. And so I don't know what to do or who to be anymore, but I want to also feel entitled to these things that I recognize and identify with. So can I have that and sort of like take out these sorts of ingredients? And a lot of the time it's like, no. And so does the punk scene exist anymore? I think with the rise of just sort of like saturated uh ideas of like what it means to be this or that in social media, I think it gets sort of diluted in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I think there's definitely this endangerment of feeling whole in an identity that I feel like truly does exist. But I feel like you are kind of, I feel like I have to grasp onto certain elements, um, and I'm kind of like fighting for my life as I do that. So I don't know what everyone else's experiences with punk identity is, and I know that a lot of the times it falls in line with like, um, I guess, activist work or just being able to just get the shit done that you care about in the world.
Yeah, I'll I'll speak as probably the least punk person because like if you grew up in the hood, like a lot of things you find out later that are like you thought were white are not only not white, but they're inherently they're like they were Black. And so like when I found out about like when I went to college and I had like my first like personal computer, I was like 18 or something, and like looking up like rock and roll, I was like, oh, we did that. Looking up punk, I was like, oh, we did that, and I was just getting like so angry. Like I'll forever be angry about that. Just how much they can just kind of like consume our stuff and just take it and flip it back. But like I think it's something about like what Abdu said earlier about like, oh, like I'm inherently controversial, like I can't help it, and thinking about how like people like me and Ben going to comics being like, man, where's all the Black people? Like it's almost maybe like a subconscious feeling of like, where's the Black, like where's that scene, where's us like pushing it, and it's like if we're not giving it attention or if we're like uh haven't been able to give the opportunities to do it, then it's not there. So it's almost like we were looking for ourselves, like like so then the more of us came, we're like, oh, okay, I guess it's us, maybe, and so I feel like there's that like maybe not necessarily the label, but like the like even the idea of like I do talk about like basement shows. Like when I was in Richmond, house shows was like such a thing. Like, and I didn't think that was like punk or like it was just, oh, there's no other place, just go to somebody's house, or you go over here and it's like this bar is like underneath this building and it could flood, but this is the bar. So I feel like that is, especially with everyone chasing like branding and things and like like identity period. Like I like computers being part of like something you put on your bio. Like I think just becomes just another part of like it becomes like another like hashtag in your description. So yeah, it really does feel more of like doing things that are just purposely trying to like reconnect, especially like being Black and being like visible as artists, just finding ways to be like, when you feel the attention, taking that and not like feeding it back to the source. Like, all right, cool, thank you. And let me like, how can I like spread this to like other Black people? How can I take this, this style that I'm working with, how can I make more like explicitly like Black work without any type of like approval? So that's something I learned. It's not something I connected to until maybe the past couple of years, like the idea of punk kind of things. So I was like, oh, you can't be a hypocrite and be punk. But I think that's just part of being a person. That's why I think it's so appealing and why it's appealed to me later in life. I'm like, yeah, I feel this way. Like I feel like frustrated and like kind of a hypocrite, and I want to do better and I want to be better. And yeah, I feel like all that's kind of tied into that.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the question I feel like I really want to put out there is like, what does it mean to be punk in a digital world, in a virtual world? You know, because when you think about punk culture, and I'm not thinking about like what how white people has framed what punk culture is, because I feel like me going to the underground clubs in Baltimore, dancing to Baltimore club music, surrounded by Black people who doing Baltimore club dances all night, raging. That's punk as well. You know what I'm saying? And so like I feel like inherently a lot of, and we know that Black people invented punk and rock and roll, et cetera. But I think even up until, you know, recently, Black people still create spaces that are essentially punk. But I think something with the pandemic, something provoked by the pandemic, or thoughts that I've been having because of the pandemic, is really centered around what it does it mean to create space for resistance. Because honestly, and you can call me a hotep or whatever, but I don't think I don't think that we can really create spaces for resistance and spaces to be punk and radical virtually. I think that we can use virtual and digital spaces to connect to each other and communicate. But I think that, you know, when you think about the history of Black people seeking space to conjure resistance, to create space for critical dialogue, space to convene, we have always had to either go, you know, in the church basements, or, you know, underground bar clubs, or, you know, in Haiti, they had to go to the jungle to meet and talk about overthrowing the French. I think that when it comes to just creating space for resistance, to be punk and to rage, it's really gonna be hard to do that in 2021 on virtual platforms that are mostly owned by corporations and white people. So I think that we got to start really thinking about how I think that we understand, like, I think we understand that the internet is really changing things and social media is changing things, but I feel like we really got to start critically understanding that, like, what it will mean to exist as Black people in a virtual world. I mean, look at TikTok for existence. Like, Black kids, Black teenagers that create all these dope dances and songs on TikTok that gets co-opted by, you know, these white kids, and then, you know, they go on Ellen. These white kids go on Ellen, or they go on, you know, some like white talk show and be like doing the dances that these Black teenagers created. So I just feel like none of us is safe online, honestly, and I think that's why we probably have seen a decline of just Black punk energy, because like a lot of our existence and dialogue and just exchanges exist virtually.
Mm.
That part.
So many gems. I like, yo, it's crazy you were talking, you mentioned Haiti, because I was just thinking about like the concept. Like, to me, what punk is like the predecessor of like the punk show, like going into New Orleans, like in an abandoned strip mall, like in like an abandoned part of the park. Like, that was just the regular place. But it's like the predecessor to that is like Maroonage, right? It's like, particularly in Haiti, where it's like, you know, so many spiritual leaders are like, you know what I mean? Like they're the focus, right? They're like, whatever, not necessarily the leader, but the focus of like these maroon communities. They're having rituals out there. That's a punk show to me, right? And something that's like inherently punk to me, that is like deeply Black, not Black as a modifier to whiteness, but just like as a thing in it itself, is like, is an inherent incoherence to the colonizers, right? Like or like, if it's material, it's like, it's an exteriority, right? It's nothing that's incorporated within the spectacle of like white society and colonial society, you know? So to me, it's punk if it's just like, you can't incorporate it. Like, it's totally inconsistent. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that's hard, it's like, I got into punk sort of late, not as a teenager, but in my 20s. And it was like in this really, really white space. And to me, and like a lot of people were like, yo, what's up with you? You trying to be white? You know, I know your mom's white. Is that what's going on? Like, there was a lot of that, you know? And definitely thinking of Black, and like, I remember Afro punk being introduced, and I was a little older, right? So I was like, they were like, oh, you're Afro punk. It's like, I don't know, I've just been punk and black for a bunch of years, you know what I mean? So I felt like kind of late to it. But I think something that I grew to appreciate is that black punk is not a modifier, and like punk is like, we invented all the stuff, you know what I mean? Like, and much like Richie, like at a certain point, you know, when the third eye was opening up, I was starting to think like, do white people, do they create anything? Like, do they make anything? Because it feels like we make everything. And I totally agree with this idea that like the internet does, like, I remember I was just watching that SNL skit with like, that's like the Gen Z hospital, and my friend sent it to me. I was like, so is the joke, it's just mostly white people say, like, using slang poorly, you know, like, is that the joke? No, it's interesting. It's like, right, the internet or the social media apps in particular have just sort of, it does really feel like they primarily function as this grinder for white people to just sort of like take black culture and say like, oh, this is internet slang. Like, this is, you know what I mean? It's like this highly efficient appropriation tool, which is like, you know, whiteness is like as a subjectivity, or as like a position within like capitalism. It's like, that's basically what it is. That's basically, to me, my understanding of what whiteness is. It's not a culture, it's not a language, it's just this like logistical position within power that functions, this thing that just takes, you know what I mean, just takes like physical, metaphysical, like cultural stuff from like, you know, colonized people, in this, you know, in my case, like black people, and just sort of like makes money off of it, right? Like turns it into a commodity. So like, I totally agree, like for whatever punk is, and I do think it still exists, it's just like, you know, like, I think because it's like, to me, in its purest way, it's like unviewable outside of the participants, you know what I mean? That it's like very hard to track. Like, as soon as it becomes like a coherent subculture in some ways, you know what I mean? Like, it already becomes like something that's slightly at risk of like co-option. So to me, that can like, it's interesting. I went to a punk show. It's now probably been a couple years ago. It was like after COVID. I go, like, my friend was Khalil Ali was rapping at a punk show, another black punk or whatever. And I was going to the show, and it's like, I don't even look punk anymore. And this white dude slams into me and my friend, and I'm sitting there choking him in the neck. And we're having like a deep discussion, and a bunch of people jump onto me, and they're like, you're being aggressive, da da da. And I'm remembering, and it's a bunch of white people, but it made me think about how like me coming up in punk shows, like, if you violated, you'd get hit in the face and everyone moved on. You know what I mean? And in some ways, it's like, that made me think about, I don't know, like the inherent unruliness of punk, like how easy it is to like be separated. You know what I mean? How people, like, to me, when I was coming, like, even like, there's a highly problematic space, like personal expression was respected. You know what I mean? If you didn't want to participate in it, you know what I mean? But like, autonomy was respected. And yeah, it made me think in a similar way. I was like, I guess, like, where does punk exist? You know what I mean? Like, I can't even go to the punk show and just, you know, like, deal with anti-black shit like within 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Anyway, and I guess I snitched on myself for fighting a white dude at a punk show, but it's a punk show. You get fist fights. I don't know.
He's actually watching right now. He's in the audience.
So, because he ran away quick. I'd love to find him. We have more to talk about.
Yeah, this actually brings me to this thought about, okay, so we talked about like shifting away from centering the white gaze in some of the ways that we identify with certain terminology and identity. And so I guess I'll try to shift the conversation to like what our relationship is to Blackness and other Black people in our realms who consume your work, who interact with you on the regular, or have inferences about you based on the work that you do. And then there's this unspoken responsibility, I guess, at some point, like Ruchi talking about how you receive a certain amount of attention, and then suddenly there's this expectation of you to produce this kind of work or become this kind of person and maintain that identity. what prompted me was Abdul Ali's album Fire. So I think I read that you created Fire as like a reinterpretation of this 1920s like magazine called Fire. I'm just like, I don't know how you got your hands on this 1920s zine, which I would like to know more about. But it was created by Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Wallace Thurman, and Richard Nugent. And so and the collective was called Niggerati Manor. And I was like, is this like the Black Illuminati? Like, what is like Niggerati? Like, what is this? Anyway, I learned a lot from you disclosing that this is where the production of this album, like this is where it's rooted in. And so it was kind of like an FU to respectability politics then. And it was also a short-lived magazine, surprisingly. So it was just kind of like you found that and you took that and you also like continue to re-innovate that. But also at that time, you also mentioned, I think this was your interview with Interview Magazine, that it was considered too raunchy to get funding from NAACP at the time. And so here we are now trying to like, validate our work with our own communities, but we also run into our own folks to just sort of like validate our creativity and validate our expression. But at the same time, we run into I guess the dark side of Blackness is not a monolith, right? So it's like, it's great that Blackness is not a monolith. It's great that we know that. But also, what happens when some people are like, we need to talk this out? What happens when some people are like, let's just fight? And so it's just, I just wanted to kind of pick your brains on what your relationship to the communities that you identify with and what kind of pushback or reception you sort of like experience in the work that you do, especially with this reference to Fire. So thank you for also
Yeah.
closing that.
See, this is the type of shit we need to be talking about. And
Okay.
honestly, amongst each other, just for each other, because it's really important. But yeah, so Fire actually, I knew about that movement, the Niggerati Mansion, that happened during the Harlem Renaissance, like you said, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Wallace Thurman. And for all you illustrators out there, y'all should definitely get into it because Aaron Douglas, who is an amazing Black artist and illustrator, has beautiful, beautiful images in the book. Like he illustrated the whole thing and the cover, probably one of the most iconic covers in my opinion in like the Black publication realm. But yeah, so I actually knew about that because I watched a movie based on Richard Nugent, who was also a part of that collective, who was an openly Black gay poet at the time. And I started doing research and I found out they had a zine. And then shout out to good friends. One of my friends brought the magazine for me for my birthday. And I was like, what the hell? And I think they still doing prints of it. So just Google it, I guess, and see if you can find it. If not, I'll just try to send it to you so you can send it out there to people in the world if I
Please,
find
thank
it.
you.
But yeah, so I thought it was interesting to see these group of Black people who are queer, just unapologetic, like just buck and punk and all these things we've been talking about in the 1920s, talking about colorism, talking about sexuality, talking about these things that you wouldn't think that at the time Black folk would be talking about, because during that time, post slavery, post Reconstruction era, post and I think Jim Crow and etc., like Black people really focused on being respectable Negroes. And at that time, and so like the Black people, Black influential people, W.B. Du Bois, the whole nine, was just worried about creating like a respectable image of of a Black person, a Black American. And so this magazine was kind of like a FU to respectability politics, because the collective felt as though the real work that needs to be done or needs to be talked about and written about wasn't being written about and talked about. So they created this magazine. And like I said, they couldn't get no funding from the NAACP and, the Black church, etc., because it was too risque. And so that even blew my mind even more. And I was just like, yes, like we gotta pay homage to this. This is part of Black queer legacies, Black radical legacies. And yeah, and so, you know, I did a sonic interpretation of it, and kind of like, you know, it made sense because that's what a lot of my work is about. And, you know, shout out to Bell Hooks. Not until I read A Will to Change, which y'all should all go read, I didn't really start thinking about what it means to disrupt Black heteronormativity and patriarchy in our own communities. And right now, I just feel like, yes, Black women support me down. If any community supports me, it's Black women and Black trans women and Black queer people. And I think the least supportive community in my career is Black straight men. So Black cis het straight men. And I think that that's something that, you know, I feel like I shouldn't, Black queer people, Black trans people, Black women shouldn't have to, you know, take the responsibility in trying to like radicalize Black cis het men, and not all Black cis het men, but even still, it goes deeper than just Black cis het men being feminists or, you know, pro queer, pro trans. Is really a psychological disruption that Black cis het men have to work on in regarding to disrupting or detaching themselves from that patriarchal power that exists in all of us, really. But for Black queer people, trans people, and Black women, we kind of already had been doing that work and disrupting that because we have to survive, right? So I think for me, in regards to your question, I think that, you know, it's really important for Black cis het men to really just do the work and radicalizing themselves and making sure that they, you know, create space to fully love all Black people, Black women, Black trans people, Black queer people, so that we can, just create more solidarity and just, you know, an abundance of love within our communities, you know. And that's gonna be a lot of hard work for them, because I think what I see often is Black cis het men just leveraging themselves to be in proximity to white patriarchal power. So, I mean, this is a deep conversation, so we don't have time for this. We probably gonna have to have another panel to really talk about that, and y'all gonna have to read some Bell Hooks and also some Octavia Butler and some James Baldwin. So we can really have an informed conversation about this, because it's layers to it. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, especially the will to change, because that was like, it is just as important as you like describe it. Like, I don't think anyone can describe as like reading something, feeling like someone just gave you a key, and you're like, oh, that's so kind. You didn't have to do that, but wow. Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. You know, it definitely made that book and similar writings definitely made me reflect, like recently, especially in the maybe past couple of years. And I think when it comes to like, especially like making stuff, knowing I have Black people who look at me, at first it was in the context of illustration, talks of like identity, which was more like, well, let's just diversify the pool. Let's just like bring more people in. And there was never any talk of like, how do we fix it? Let's just bring more Black people in. And so then you're just bringing in Black people that are still being co-signed by the thing. So it's not really as like, as radical as like change worthy as the people who push it expect it to be. And so like, for me, it became less of, it's less of like representation, because I feel like that is really being co-opted, where it's like, almost like, here's my like collected person, like like, you know, like it's fine because now I have you know, some of these graphic novels have Black people, you know, some of the authors are Black, and it's not really anything deeper. And for me, I think, even though I'm like working in animation now, like when I get back to like doing comics, like, is to like I want to talk to Black people and not necessarily feel like I'm like, hey y'all, is this right? Because I feel like that always comes off corny, and people can always tell like, oh, you're trying to like collect us and put us in a thing to sell it, versus like, hey, you remember when like we used to talk like this, or do you remember like this thing? And in that way, it is kind of similar to sort of like, you know, convening outside digital spaces, like just talking to each other, like without any understanding or any like misunderstandings from people, any like, is this gonna get lost in translation? Like, are people not gonna understand this shit? So that's something that like I feel like I definitely get to do in comics a lot, like pretty much whenever I feel like it. Animation, funny enough, I can do it because like on Craig, there's like, you know, it's focusing on like a main character's a black kid, all different types of friends, but like his black family is not like this like sanitized, like it's not a black family that people can put up like, oh, this is like, you know, like the Huxtables or whatever, you know, it's like we get to like have them be petty, we get to have them be selfish, and like those are the type of black characters I like because those are black people. Like they're people who have they have, you know, faults, and they have like personal stuff. They have like black cultural memories that are outside of the show. So like we'll put in stuff from like 90s references that like black people in their like late 30s, 40s, you know, will understand. And for me, like that's better than whatever I guess representation people are trying to sort of encourage us to do, which is like, okay, now out of the spotlight, I'm still gonna turn it on, you know, the people I grew up with, the people I know, like the that sort of like nostalgia that a lot of times, especially being like in LA, like especially in this part of LA where it's not a lot of black people, I don't really get like blackness in like my general day to day. I'm just kind of like I'm very aware, like now I'm one of the only people out here, and also from the East Coast, so I'm like it's kind of sunny out here, and I can't brood like I want to. It doesn't rain, it doesn't get cold. I can't put on like a bubble coat. It's just I'm so happy it's sunny. but uh but yeah, like for me, I think that's something that I've been trying to like talk to like other black artist friends. Like I know me and Ben talk about it every now and then, just of like the things we're doing and like the people that come after us. And I think I think when it comes to like the digital stuff that Abdu was talking about, like there is a worry that I can see it where like younger black artists feel like torn between like I'm black, I'm gonna be aggressively black online, I don't care, and also the pull to like be a brand and also be like very clear. And so it's I can feel them at odds sometimes between like those two things. So yeah, I'm trying to just be like, yeah, I have a job, a day job, but also I'm gonna say this stuff. And no one in my company is gonna tell me I can't do this. You know, like I'm not like tricking the company. It's just I'm not like I'm an artist, but it's not like my whole identity. And even then that's split in between like, you know, I'll make beats that are off to the side. I'll make this off to the side, you know. So I feel like that might be like a good like, I don't know, not like a good model, but just like something I'm trying to like cultivate as I learn about myself to just sort of make sure that like people after me aren't so like lost, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like I'm super excited to know about this magazine. I never heard about it before. It's also interesting, just sort of like I feel like one of the benefits of like looking back in history is sort of is seeing like our current context. Like we see that it's not new, and also thinking about like well, like we were talking about like how lucrative it is to be a certain kind of activist, you know, to like fall within these certain kinds of like brands or whatever that are very lucrative. And there are a lot of people who are not self-reflective about that and what sort of power or like how they can curate like around them when it comes to trying to present something that's like an alternative positionality. It's so interesting, like how much like the NAACP is like at one time like a hero in our history, but then also like reflected a lot of like really terrible like undercutting. Like similarly, like you know, it's funny reading about Booker T. Washington. I don't fuck with Booker T. Washington. Neither did W.E. Du Bois, but also W.E. Du Bois did a lot of undercutting of like, you know, like radical people, you know what I mean? So I think that's interesting. I mean, also just like we already know not all skin folk are kinfolk, you know what I mean? And I think also just like I love what Richie was saying. It's like this is not about or like I feel like the move has been to sort of like introduce Black people, right? In like introduce like what is it like diversity, but not actually critique the structure itself. You know, it's like so important, right? And I think like the benefit, particularly like in thinking about like at the age I am now, like what can I provide? You know what I mean? Like what can I do? How can I benefit people coming after me? People who are like just not as like acceptable to white people. Like it's not lost on me. My like the way I talk, my palette, the fact, you know, like culturally, like in some ways, like my relationship to punk and how I came into it made me even more acceptable to white people. You know what I mean? These are all things that I think about. and like how, yeah, like how do we replicate like maroonage? How do we like replicate like systems that are not a reflection of like retrograde or like destructive dynamics, you know, I think are so important, you know what I mean? But man, what an amazing conversation. What an amazing.
Honestly, I think just hearing y'all talk about this, it just reminded me of this really it was, I would say it's more playful a debate, but we really got, like my friend and I got into this argument about Black excellence. It's just like, should we just completely divorce ourselves from it, or you know, or just fuck Black excellence? I think it creates more, this trope creates more harm than anything as we continue to bring it up. And so I think our relationship to achievement and our relationship to reward, as creatives and as Black people making our way through the world, I think sometimes having this sort of discussion around what it means to be, just be, is a harder conversation to have than having a conversation about being excellent or just not being excellent. And so I think um, there is this entitlement, like we just sort of coined we jokingly coined the term Black mediocrity, and it's just like, why are we so afraid of that? Like, why can't we have that? And so I learned a lot from my friend through that. And I'm just like, actually, I never really thought about Black mediocrity. It leaves a weird taste in my mouth still, but I'm just kind of like, this is sort of necessary to swim in and just be like, what is it that we run from? And so I think that talk turned into this whole like dystopic imagination of like, what does it mean to just like exist without having these sorts of expectations around what it means to be an acceptable Black person. And even if we, you know, outwardly divorce ourselves from these terms, like, do we, like, what about our internalized feelings around that? Like, how do we combat that? And so I think that shifts my question to like our creation of dystopic narratives within the music that we create, Abdul Ali, and also with the illustrations that we create. Like Richie Pope, you have this sort of ominous tone in the box we sit on, even though it's just two kids kicking it. There's this sort of way of that you kind of draw this geography of like, we're neither here nor there, but here we are. And I think, for me personally, I think it's kind of spooky. But then with Ben Passmore and Date Go Hold, you kind of like have this sort of like dystopic environment where it's just sort of like this person's just sort of the protagonist sort of moving through the world, but is also very messy. And I think it's just like we're so, I think collectively there's this fear of like owning up to our messiness, but once we like kind of regurgitate like this is what's up, it's out there in the world, and however people receive it is how they're going to receive it based on, I guess, their own inferences around the world, their own experiences, traumas, legacies, whatever have you. And the reason I bring up dystopia is because I think there's an innovation to creating dystopic narratives as Black creatives. And so I think this sort of the last question is, how do you, what's your relationship to dystopia? And funny enough, I think I sort of laughed when Abdul Ali brought up in an interview this sort of article about rats going extinct. And I think there was sort of this joke going around of like, you thought like it would be rats and roaches that would like survive the apocalypse, but maybe it's the beginning of the apocalypse to see rats sort of go extinct. And this is serious, even though it's kind of like, oh. So I think just throwing that in there, like, you're laughing, but I laughed too when I read about it, and I was like, rats are going extinct. This is serious. Yeah. And so I still have this anxiety around it too, where I'm like, I think I think there's something about being creatives and like flipping this idea of dystopia on its head, because we consume things like Blade Runner, but like Blade Runner doesn't have any Black people unless they're like extras. I'm not talking about the new one. I'm talking about the yeah. Because the new one is just kind of like, here's Black people, are you happy now? But that's another conversation. Anyways, I'm just gonna throw that out there as the last question, even though we're wrapping up, but I just wanna sort of see what your hot take is on this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that people often align my music with the aesthetic of dystopia and dystopic. And I will say that when I started making music, I definitely was a huge fan of Octavia Butler and I was reading Parables of the Sower, which if y'all have not read that, y'all need to read that. And if you haven't read it, that's a shame. Like, why haven't you? But it's an amazing, amazing post-apocalyptic novel that centers this Black woman protagonist. And I guess ever since then, because I had a whole class in college about I'm an English major, and we was reading post-apocalyptic literature, like Parables of the Sower or The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I think. Yeah, which I do love that book as well, and I love the movie. And we need a Parables of the Soul movie, but we know how that be. But I think that queerness is inherently dystopic, maybe because in the realm of dystopia, and I don't want to glorify destruction or people like really going through it and just like, just like hell, basically. Like, I don't want to glorify that part of dystopia, but I think in the realm of dystopia, and it creates like this barren canvas for us to, like you said, be messy and question. And for me to be queer is to be in a constant state of questioning and daily, questioning, interrogating, ideologies and systems and just perspectives that plague us and hold us prison. So, I think yeah, the idea of dystopia is inherently queer, and it creates this like space to like start over again and dream or envision what it means to, it depends on what your intentions are, but for me, I also think about what it means to envision a world where, a future where Black folk can truly be autonomous, humanized, beings that don't have to fight for food and don't have to fight, what I'm saying, for land and, space is just, be. Yeah, what I'm saying? That capitalism and, colonialism and white supremacy takes away from us. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, dystopia, yeah. And I guess my sound is dystopic in a way because I'm often just trying to do the most to create new sounds, even if it's ugly and messy and uncomfortable and confrontational, or even if it's really pretty and dreamy and cerebral. Like, I just feel like I'm always just trying to interrogate, I guess the idea of genres and, what it means for music or sound to be sonically pleasing. But yeah, and I know we're wrapping up. I just also wanted to mention, I don't, this is not relative to the question, but I think the last question made me think about the importance for Black people to collaborate, important for us. And I think that is ironic in the digital world. Me and my friends talk about this a lot, like, in the world where we're really accessible to each other virtually. I don't think that I see enough collaborations, honestly, and not even just within like, oh, me as a music artist collaborating with another music artist, but my whole practice has been really about collaborating with other artists in different disciplines. Like me and Richie Pope. That's why when I saw this panel, I saw Richie, I was like, yo, this is so full circle. We collaborated back in the day. Richie Pope like made a flyer for one of my tours, because I was such a fan over his work. And I was just like, yeah, let's do this. But I think about the Fire magazine. That was a collaboration between writers and poets and playwrights and Aaron Douglas and illustrators. Like, and I think that not only do we need to, make sure that we preserve and keep power over our culture and our aesthetic and our voices, but I think that now, we talk about the NAACP and we talk about like just these archaic Black institutions. I think that it could be in our best interest to create new platforms and institutions that validate us and that support us as Black people versus, and this is a discussion often in the art world because a lot of galleries and museums are white and they often, validate what's the new, what's the art that should be talked about and centered. And I think that we need to like do the work and collaborate, and just through collaboration, creating platforms like publications. Like it'd be so dope if I saw Ben and Richie create a publication that had writers like me or other people, you know, in this, you know. And I think that it can be digital, but I think it would be very important for it to be print. And because, you know, I wouldn't have been able, you know, to see a Fire magazine from the 1920s if they didn't print it. You know what I'm saying? That was 100 years old, and I was able to find it. You know what I'm saying? This is before the internet. So I think that it's really important for us to collaborate, to create new platforms and institutions, whether they big or small, that really provide space for us to, you know, fully be creatively autonomous, but also to preserve and to also validate, you know, what we need to talk about, what we need to focus on, who we need to put spotlights on, and what work is not mediocre, or etc. You know what I'm saying? Like to create, you know, I guess prestige. And that's often something that I talk about too, like Black excellence and Black prestige. And I'm kind of, you know, no shade, I'm kind of on the fence, because I'm here for Black prestige and, like, you know, that, you know, in a way, but not, you know, in a way that's violent, obviously. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
No, absolutely. Also, the seed has been planted for your curation, because you're also a brilliant curator, Abdu. So
Thank
I'd love to
you.
see this idea come to life potentially, with having Ben Passmore and Richie Pope as part of this um,
And
anthology.
we just gotta do it. I think, you
Yeah.
know, millennials, Gen Zs, we so in our heads, like, just do the shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just gotta start doing this stuff and doing things that are physical products, you know, like that can survive off the grid. Because what if the world doesn't, and all the internet shit is destroyed? Then what? Then it's gonna be a big ass blank of history between 2010 and 2021.
Just rats and roaches. Yeah, I was yeah, everything collaboration wise, all that, 100% agree that all that stuff's really good. And in terms of like dystopian stuff, I think I kind of realized later in life, like I grew up in Newport News, and at the same time as there's like sort of like nice suburbia, kind of like, you know, nice like Virginia suburbia, there's also like, I guess what they used to refer to as like urban decay, which is like, you know, the promise of economic stuff in the cities, and then people dipping out, taking it and dipping out, and just leaving things that just kind of fall apart. And as a kid, I didn't, which is why dystopian media that's too dark kind of like bothers me, because I didn't see it as a bad. I thought every neighborhood looked like that. So I thought every neighborhood had like buildings that were kind of abandoned, but there was like cool trees that were growing, and like I thought it was cool looking. I didn't know it was bad, or like, you know, bad until I got older and would see like people talk about, oh, this neighborhood's sketchy, this place is bad. And I was like, I mean, it looks kind of cool. Like I like seeing like, you know, earth coming back up through concrete, and like, you know, people, like you can see layers of like graffitis, you can see stuff from like the 70s, and then like moving up, like that stuff is like really, like that stuff's history. And I think now we're seeing like physical structures that are the opposite, where it's just like a gray block of apartments, you know, another block of apartments, like just taking up space so no one can like create on it, you know. And I don't know, I feel like I definitely want to embrace it more, because for me, dystopia isn't necessarily like negative. You know, it's like this idea that if the structures that we have collapse now, that after that is chaos, versus like people just build. That's the point. Like people keep building. Like the human spirit just rebuilds when things are like changed. You know, like Black people, like our whole history, at least in this continent, has been to do that, just to keep rebuilding, even if there's only like 2 of us left. That's 2 people that can carry something somewhere, you know, like carry each other on their back, you know. So that's something that I think about a lot when it comes to like dystopia, and the idea that it's not, for me, it's not hopeless. It's just an extension of, you know, stuff I've seen, and like progress and change, and, you know, hopefully there's more of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely, in terms of I was thinking about what Richie was saying, just about like our history has like represented, like I feel like we've seen many dystopians or dystopias as just sort of like generations of people. I mean, just sort of like being totally engulfed in a like a kind of enclosure you know what I mean, that's for primarily for profit, that the narrative is like falling apart, you know what I mean, that it's just like the transatlantic slave trade, Reconstruction, you know, the Great Migration. Like, what is more dystopian than the realities of the Great Migration? Both of them, you know. So in some ways, it's like we've already seen that, like, once, like, in the face of just sort of like the meat grinder of capitalism, we still thrive. You know what I mean? Like, we know that we could do that. You know what I mean? Like, I do think like someone's gonna have to blow up the planet before like Black people just like, no, we're just gonna figure it out. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, I don't think that like a dystopian, something that I think is like different that from like sort of like white Western representations of the dystopia is that is inherently sort of like existentially alienating. Like something about not being the great person within the overall story. Like, to me, my understandings of like dystopia is like, not only is the world not constructed for you, you're an irrelevant part of it. You know what I mean? And I think for me, I've never been interested in writing that story necessarily. Like, Dayglow Hill is definitely the story of someone who's inconsequential. Like, he had, you know, like, it's ostensibly me, but it's like, I have no idea what's going on. Things are constantly happening. I don't understand. Am I not, I'm not an important part of the narrative at all. But I think it's like that is not like, that's just a reality. It's not like, that's not the main tragedy of the story, right? The story is just like survival in the face of that. You know what I mean? Like finding beauty in it. And to me, like, you know, I guess I'm just repeating the same thing. I don't find dystopias necessarily inherently depressing. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's like in some ways just like an overly obvious visualization of like our present. You know what I mean? And I think for me, like, I think that it, in a lot of ways, like, it is sort of the best way to talk about what is happening. You know what I mean? Like, the rats dying, I think, is a really good example of that. It's like, you know, how many more things need to happen for it to just be even more obvious that it's the end of the world? You know what I mean? And we are living in the dystopian future that people sort of like try to LARP about. You know what I mean? And I think that it's interesting that, like, I think of this sort of idea of the zombie apocalypse is like such like a white colonialist sort of like power fantasy, but for us, it's not that, right? It's sort of like, for me, you know, it's you know, like how it's like navigating sort of like a world, like a, you know, like a dystopian world that's not structured for my survival. You know what I mean? And still finding beauty in it. That is a much more interesting story for me, and also just feels very grounded in history and reality and present.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I honestly wish this conversation could continue, and you know, hopefully, potential anthologies for more of these collective jam sessions could continue. I'm definitely looking forward to Abdul Ali's curation of this, since he planted the seed. So thank you. No pressure. I think it'll be brilliant, regardless. Um, Thank you all for joining us on this really important discussion. Thank you so much, Abdul Ali, Ben Passmore, and Richie Pope for joining us and just being able to share your truths. I appreciate you deeply. TCAF is brought to you in part by Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation, with special thanks to Beguiling Books and Art, Page and Panel, the TCAF shop, and with government support from Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and Toronto Arts Council. On May 14th at 8 p.m., check out Life into Comedy panel with Meichino and Lon Hirsch and Yuko Oto, Tom and Shui Flanagan, and it's moderated by Boom. So check that out. Make sure to check out our online marketplace to get your hands on some dope art and comics by your lovely creatives taking part in this year's TCAF. That's all, folks. Thank you so much for coming, and happy TCAF.